Welcome. Oh,
Here we go.
now I would start with a good welcome, everyone. And this is a cold February meeting. But we have a great meeting tonight. We have a real variety. We have from Zach Whalen doing blackwater diving in Hawaii, and Mike Airy doing a video about the video camera, the Vaquita. So the Vaquita, the older and the new model, and then contrasting the two, showing the improvements. And then Jake Stout, some of his favorites, and which I can segue right to the favorite thing. You know, in all last year, we started some of my favorites, and I credit Daryl for that idea. And it's been great. I know we've been getting a lot of good feedback on that. And I think the people who have presented, wanted to presented, and now probably feel that they've done it and leave room for someone else. Well, we put a call to speakers out, and not many people have answered. So if you would like to do, some of your favorites from 2021, it's okay. If you have done that type of presentation, last year, and you have different images, it's great. That would definitely welcome that. Initially, when we started out, it was like the goal was like my favorite 10. Well, that put a lot of pressure on people to think, well, what's my favorite? It's just, so it's evolved to just some of your favorite pictures. And it doesn't have to be your favorite. So if we can have your favorite from your recent trip, favorite from whatever. So now my goal is to try and have that one of those favorite type presentations each month. So it's kind of a casual, fun component of the meeting. So tonight, we'll start off with Zach. Now, Zach Whalen has done a lot of work with Jonathan Bird. And I don't know if the blackwater diving in Hawaii was with Jonathan or not, but I'm sure we're going to find out. But Zach had done a wonderful presentation for us last year, and I know this one will also be a good one. So, Zach, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. Everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so blackwater diving in Hawaii. This was filmed partially for Blue World, partially for my own work. Beginning of COVID, we found ourselves without a place to go, so we went somewhere warm and tropical and spent a few months out in the wonderful tropics of Hawaii, Kona. Did a lot of diving, and we're introduced to this idea of blackwater diving, which is something we hadn't done before. And I know a lot of undersea diver trips end up out there, so we wanted to share with you guys this really cool experience. How do I get my screen shared on?
Is there a share screen on the bottom? Should be a greenish color.
Okay, I am. Somehow through the pandemic, I did not learn Zoom.
No, it's okay. On the very bottom of your screen, if you move your cursor down there, you'll see share screen.
There we go.
Okay. Great.
All right. Okay, everyone see that?
Yep.
So what is blackwater diving? Is the big question I get asked by most people. The ocean has, as we know, a whole variety of ranges, going down into the abyssal plane eventually. And as scuba divers, we get to experience this tiny little blip at the surface of the ocean. And it's fun. We get to see dolphins and seals and fish. But there are a lot of animals that live a lot deeper in the ocean, and without a submarine, we don't get to see them or figure out where they go. It includes a lot of juvenile fish and a lot of the plankton in the ocean. It's just too easy to get eaten in the top zones during the day. At night, however, you do get this upward migration. of animals coming up to the very surface to feed on the small planktons, to be fed upon, and to try to take shelter from the depths and gets a little bit of warmth from the warmer water. So this is what blackwater diving is about. It's blue water diving at night. So you're going out into the middle of the steepest drop off you can get to get this upwelling and see what plankton and things eating the plankton happens to come by you. For us diving in New England, our dive guide Jeff summed it up of it's a muck dive in the open ocean. So we did this dive in Kona, which is one of the premier spots in the world to be doing blackwater diving. Kona is really unique in the Hawaiian Islands. The Big Island of Hawaii is the newest island in the Hawaiian chain. So it doesn't have the plateau that other islands have. So when we look at Kona on the map here, it drops off very, very quickly. So the little boat represents the dive site. They just go straight offshore from Kona. And within 15, 20 minutes, you're in 5,000 to 7,000 feet of water, which gives you this wonderful upwelling of life and brings in all the cool critters. Now, blackwater diving is done all over the world now. They're doing it in Europe. They're doing it in the Philippines and Thailand and Florida. Most places will toss a buoy in with a light and kind of drift with the buoy and keep a visual mark on it. Hawaii, they tie you to the boat, so you cannot get lost, which I actually appreciate as a photographer because I was at the end of my line a lot trying to take pictures and I never lost the boat. So you have about a 40-foot line going down and about a 10-foot line connected to that. So you can go down to about 50 feet and up to the surface. There is a fair bit of current because the current is what's bringing the life up. So you're going to be drifting with the current, and that line gives you a reference point as well to where the current is. Otherwise, there's no reference point for how deep you are, where you are in the water column. So having the line, I found really helped. Some other people who dive in Florida a lot really like not having a line. But this is the way Hawaii is done. Everything does need to be clipped to you. If you drop a light in 7,000 feet of water, you're not getting it back. The only exception to this is that the dive master on these dives typically is free swimming. So they can swim around and look for critters to help you photograph them or to fend off any larger animals that show up. So this is what it looks like at first. You drop down and there's lines in the water, there's divers in the water, but there's not much else. So it takes a moment to get oriented, but what you're looking for on these dives, you see all these amazing photos of, in the bottom right-hand corner there, you see our dive master, Jeff, he's pointing to something. Like that's the scale you're looking at. These juvenile fish, these plankton, they're tiny. So he's actually pointing to a juvenile long-jawed flounder there. It's maybe the size of his thumbnail. So it takes a couple dives to really dial into what you're looking for. A lot like New England, you want to find a nudibranch. It takes a few dives to find that first nudibranch, but once you do, you start to see them. So following the dive master and making sure what they're looking for, because you start to see some really cool things. You see a lot of ctenophores. We get some species in New England. The Venus girdle is one of the really cool species you see out in Hawaii, but you get a whole variety. There's no ambient light, so you get a lot of the luminescence coming off of them. You also get a lot of tunicates and salps. So we have our tunicates in New England are almost always stocked and on the bottom, but a lot of them are free swimming salps. So they have two stages of their life. They get really big and are independent and they swim around on their own. And then they eventually will sort of shrink a little bit and turn into this long chain. And that's their sexual phase. And they'll bud off with another tunicate or another salp chain and make lots of individual salps who will then turn back into larger salps and swim around. And these are everywhere on these dives. They're also the favorite food of a lot of things. You'll see a lot of jellyfish trying to bring salps in. And the other thing you will see a lot of are jellyfish. You get a very detailed briefing before these dives on things to look out for. You definitely will see box jellies on these dives. Luckily, we didn't. Sea wasps that you don't want to bump into, especially at night. We found a lot of other jellyfish species. You still see a lot of interesting behavior. This little arthropod here is hitching a ride on a salp. You see a lot of animals hitching rides on other animals, making that vertical migration. I guess it's a lot easier if you have a ride. You also see a lot of squid. You won't get good pictures of them. You'll get hit in the face by them. They usually dart in to use your light to hunt and then hit you, squirt some ink in your face, and then they're gone. So it's a part of the dive. We got a couple blurry shots of them. You have to mention them because they're all around you. They're circling you the whole dive, but they're not very photogenic. Someone gets a good squid shot once you know. And not everything is small though. This is an Amphilia, which is a net casting siphonophore. And we put a diver in there to show a scale. It's actually starting to contract at this point. This was about 7 feet long when we first saw it.
Wow.
So a colony of siphonophores that puts out a whole variety of these little sticky nets that it uses to catch food. When they first get hit by light, they'll shrink in a little bit, and then they'll slowly expand back out after they sort of adapt. We were shooting all video, so these are all video stills. Having strobes is definitely an advantage when you're shooting blackwater critters. But fortunately for video, you need the lights, which does change the behavior slightly. The other thing you see a lot of are juvenile fish. Hawaii is a really unique spot because it's near nothing. Every animal that is in Hawaii has to have a long enough juvenile phase to drift from another island to Hawaii. This is why when you're diving in Hawaii, you'll see more eels than anywhere else in the Pacific, because eels have a long larval stage and they can get to Hawaii, whereas other fish can't. So this also means you see a lot of juvenile fish in the water column around Hawaii. They don't go on the reef, there's no nurseries, they just hang out in the black water. They go down really deep during that day, and they come up to the surface at night. And once they get big enough, they head onto the reef. So if you're in Hawaii, you're doing day dives, night dives, it's fun because you have your Morishidal, you get to see the juvenile phase, the long-jawed flounders, and the squirrelfish. So these are all things you see on the reef as well as in the black water in their juvenile phase. You also have really unique animals. This is the pelagic Hawaiian seahorse. It's a completely unique species of seahorse, only found in the black water in Hawaii. It never goes onto the reef. It's adapted to the reef, it's camouflaged to the reef, but they live their entire lives in the pelagic currents. And they go down deep during the day and then come up. You find them almost exclusively on the surface. When you're in these blackwater dives, again, Jeff always tells us, go down, look for critters, but a lot of the stuff's right at the surface. We found these guys, a couple inches below the surface, and they're looking down, and they kind of drop down on their prey items. But they are still seahorses. They have their tails, and if they get too close to you, they will grab onto you. If you see a lot of them in the dive, we actually did have one person come up with one still on them. We very carefully removed it, put it back in the water. It was safe. But they will latch onto your finger or your camera if it gets too close to them. But really, really fun find. Now, beyond the small stuff, you do see big things as well. It is a rare event, but they give you the whole shark safety talk because sometimes a oceanic white-tip shark will crash your parade. We didn't have any issues, but when you're focusing on macro critters, obviously you don't want a large shark swimming around you as well. So it shifts the dive very quickly from a macro dive to a shark dive. And this guy actually ended our dive a little early because he started getting a little too nosy and bumping into people's fins. So, but you also will see, we saw a mobile ray on one dive, which no one had ever seen on the Blackwater dive in Hawaii before. It was passing pelagic, but people see manta rays on these dives. They see whale sharks on these dives. So always have a GoPro as well as a macro lens on your camera when you do these, because there's a ton to see. A couple photo tips and tricks if you guys are interested in ever doing this, you're ever in Hawaii and Florida, you really want to have a macro lens on your camera. I was running a GH5, which is a micro four thirds sensor. I was running a 60mm macro lens on that, which is great for the little critters. I might actually switch to like a 30mm macro lens to get like a 60mm overall. So you can get some of the big critters as well as some of the mid-sized critters. Keeping the f-stop as high as you possibly can helps a lot. There's very little, you want to be able to get as much of the animal in focus as possible, and getting them in focus is the hard part. Things are blowing by you, they're in the current. So the higher the f-stop, the higher chance you're going to get a sharp photo of what you're looking for. I tried lots of tricks. I was chatting with Jonathan when we did this. He tried putting a little stick on the end of his camera as a focus point. It didn't really work. I tried autofocus, I've tried manual focus, and what I ended up finding was best was the rope attached to me to the boat was about as far away as I wanted to shoot things. So I used manual focus to focus on that line. I put focus peaking on my camera, and then I pushed the camera in and out around the subject to get it in focus and try to keep it in focus because I'm shooting video by moving the camera rather than having the camera try to focus on it. Because because of the lack of contrast, it can be, autofocus will seek a lot. So this is the technique I found that worked best. Stills are going to be a lot easier than shooting video. There's a lot of fuzzy video that I can't use. With the stills, when you have your strobes, most people have a very wide focus light that they'll use, and then have your strobes angled in to reduce the backscatter. Again, get that focus point in and hit the trigger. Strobes will hit the subject matter, freeze it, it's in focus. You have a nice black background. Some of my backgrounds are a little blue. It's just the spillover light from having video lights. Always face up current. I swim up a little bit, let things drift to you, take photos, and then sort of drift back in the current with them. And once they're gone, the best, unfortunate thing is to sort of let them be gone, swim up and look for the next thing. Because it's kind of a raining of random little things. You get back on the boat and everyone was on the same dive, but everyone saw something different. People on one side of the boat will see a seahorse, the other people will see a jellyfish, and it kind of goes back and forth or whatever drifts past you. Have a GoPro on your camera or a Paralenz. I know that's the talk coming up. This photo here actually was a Paralenz on my mask. So you get some behind the scenes shot of how I was doing everything. But you will see bigger animals occasionally. So always have some kind of GoPro or action camera to get a wide shot, or a camera that's capable of zooming out to wide. And be patient. There definitely were moments in these dives where you're just kind of drifting and you don't see anything. You know, the dives are usually 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the operator. You don't have to swim, so you're not going to go through air very fast. It's just kind of remember to relax, enjoy the moment, and then something will show up. I've saw people swimming in circles and tangling their lines. There's no point. Just have fun with it. The other thing I always do need to mention in this is the reason most people go to Kona to go night diving is to go with the manta rays. If you are in Kona and you can only do one night dive, do a manta ray dive. You get swarmed by giant manta rays. It's an unbelievable experience. Absolutely worth doing. The thing I right to bring this up, the first Blackwater dive we did was a combo dive with a Blackwater dive and a manta dive. I wouldn't recommend it. If you only have one night, it gets it all in, but you do a manta dive, you go back to the dock, you drop people off, you get more people, you go back out, and you get back in like midnight. It's a really long night. And if you have a DSLR or mirrorless camera, you have to swap between a wide angle lens from manta rays to a macro lens for the Blackwater. So if possible, I would do them on separate days, but it is a option a lot of charters do offer. So just planning your trips while you're out there. Also, our dive guide was Jeff Millison, really phenomenal diver. And he has quite literally wrote the book on Blackwater diving. So if you want to see cool Blackwater critters, definitely check out his Instagram. These are a handful of the cool things he's seen. I don't know how he got an octopus on a seahorse's head, but there's cool stuff. He's one of the only people that's seen cookie cutter sharks on a regular basis. So definitely check him out and grab a copy of his book if you're going to head out there. It's an invaluable resource. I've been editing a lot of Blackwater video footage recently. Definitely grab his book. He is also the guide for Konahonu Divers. They're absolutely the people I recommend going out with. They're a great dive shop, great operation. They do Blackwater dives, manta dives, reef dives. We worked with manta ray charters. It's the company. They do manta ray dives as well, which we did with them. So definitely check them out. If you're in Kona, call them first. Get Jeff's book. Jeff will be around. He'll definitely sign it for you. It's one of those dive books. You got to have it if you're going to dive the area. And be on the lookout. So we definitely filmed part of this for Jonathan Bird's Blue World. That episode is up. It is on his channel. He cut it together with, it was just myself and my fiance Annalise in Hawaii. He cut it together with a Blackwater dive he did in Florida. So if you want to see the contrast between Hawaii and Florida, you can see his episode. You'll see that there's much cooler stuff in Hawaii. But also, please give my YouTube channel a link. There's going to be a full Hawaii Blackwater video coming out very shortly. I wanted it done before this, but I'm actually down in Florida right now, so I don't know what the cold is like. Doing some cave diving, so trip got in the way of video editing. But there will be a video up there soon, and we just put a video up about harlequin shrimp in Hawaii as well. So, are there any questions about Blackwater diving?
I'll tell you, it sounds exciting. I've never done it. I don't know how many that are watching here tonight have done it, but boy, it sounds exciting, especially seeing all those creatures, all those jellies for that matter.
Yeah,
I have a question.
I mean, this is a sampling of what we saw. If we showed you every single thing we saw, we'd be here all night. It's the variety of things you'll see, and then every dive is different. That was over the course of 3 dives. Every dive we saw something different. We saw, half a dozen seahorses on one dive and none the next, and we saw more fish on one dive. And then definitely, the shark was a fun way to end one dive. That was actually my fiance's first shark encounter, was an oceanic white tip at night. She was focusing on a jellyfish, and I'm like poking at her. She's like, "What?" And this giant shark buzzes her. So you never know what you'll see.
Wow.
I'm getting a brown wetsuit for the next time I do that.
I have a question about
Potentially.
the animal, the sizes. Can you see these outside of your, camera? What are you seeing? Are you really seeing these creatures, or are you just focusing on that, tiny marble in the column and hoping it's, something cool?
So initially all you're going to see is that tiny marble, really. Like you're going to see something small. And again, as you get your camera close, either through your viewfinder or through the back screen, whichever way, you'll start to see the animal. So you see something. I mean, there are a couple times where I took pictures of little blobs and I didn't know what they were until I got back. Like there's a lot of little crab larvae that they just look like a little orange ball. And you can kind of zoom in and see little legs, but they didn't really make the cut for cool photos to show. So it depends. Again, definitely, diving with Jeff is the best way to do it because he does this every week. So he finds things like that little juvenile flounder I probably would have missed. And he points it out, and then you can go in and get that photo. We saw a couple of flounders actually. We never saw an eel. Most dives will see a juvenile eel. That's one thing we never got to see. But definitely following the dive guide. Another good trick a lot of people do is have a very narrow beamed light with you. The boats usually provide them. It's good for sort of hunting through the water. If you have those big, bright video lights, it can wash them out. Narrow beam light will sort of hit the edges of those little critters better, so you can find them and then focus in on them.
Also, if I'm diving with my partner who doesn't have a camera, is it, is he going to see anything?
You can still see things. There are definitely, most of the people on these dives have cameras, but not all of them. That picture of the Alpinia I showed, the diver in the background for scale doesn't have a camera. She was just there to enjoy it. Because you will see a lot of things. You get your light under the Safan Tina Forge, you'll see all the luminescence, and if you get a GoPro or something nice, you can also get some really nice, just wide, dark shots. So it's definitely a fun dive no matter what.
Cool. Can't wait. I've been blown out. I've been trying to go in Florida, but I've been blown out so many times. So
Florida gets blown out. And Florida, again, it's different because you're not tethered. So you have to really keep an eye on that buoy. And I know Jonathan lost a buoy a couple times when he was in Florida because he got really into filming and looked up and couldn't see it. Had to go to the surface and look for the light on the surface and swim back to it. So I like Kona being tied to the boat. And that never happened, but lines did get tangled a couple times. And especially when the shark showed up, like people were spinning a lot. So pros and cons to each.
thanks.
Does each diver have their own tether?
Yes. So the Kona Honu, the way they run it is it's a 6-pack boat. So there's only 6 divers on the dive and they push you off in pairs. So each diver has the line to the boat and the John line. And so they push off the people on the bow, people midships, people stern, so that no one, and you kind of, again, if everyone's staying with the current, everyone stays out of each other's way. And then when you're ready to come back to the boat, you go to the surface, then you unclip yourself and swim to the back of the boat. And one guy did ask on one trip, not with Kona Honu, with a different operation, of like, what happens when you kind of unclipped? And everyone's like, well, don't. And somehow he got unclipped and we looked down and there was a diver just kind of descending below us. Luckily the dive master grabbed him, but you do want to be careful if you're not, it's a guideline for where you are, but it can break, it can come undone. So you still want to have your eye on your computer, make sure you're not falling into the abyss.
It seems like it'd be more appropriate that they would use hooks instead of clips, given the big shark swimming around. And I'm still hung up on that.
Yeah, he was curious. He definitely bumped into some lights, bumped into some people, but you're not allowed to fish for sharks anymore in Hawaii, so they're nice and safe.
So they didn't chum just a few hours beforehand.
No,
and just to make it more exciting,
No, we actually went
letting
out
on that they were bait on the fish hooks.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, I think you've got a nightmare lined up for you for tonight.
Oh, there's no question.
Zach, could you comment on how you have your strokes positioned? Do you have them angled in towards your center of focus, or are they slightly spanned outward to overlap?
I had mine out a little bit. It's almost impossible to reduce backscatter to nothing in these. There's just, especially with video lights, you start getting so many little critters buzzing around your camera. You're gonna have some amount of backscatter. Some people will put them all the way in and put them almost next to the lens and put straight out, and just basically try to only photograph what's right in front of them. I had them out and angled to try to minimize it as much as I could with the video lights and try to put the video lights almost crossing each other, because I was only worried about my small center point and just trying to minimize the backscatter, but also the light spill past my subject. Like I was trying to get as black a background as possible. Strobes make that a little bit easier. You can definitely dial your strobes down so they only hit what's right in front. I want to go back and do this with strobes and stills, because shooting video was stressful at times, trying to keep everything in focus.
Thank you.
Well, if we don't have any other questions. Well, Zach, that was terrific. Give us all a good idea of what blackwater diving is like and what to do. So, and also wanting to do it. I mean, I've always wanted to do it, but now I know a little more. So I'm psyched.
It's a good time. I've been looking at charts. I know people usually ask if you can do it in New England, and I would love to try someday. I've got been talking to a couple different fishermen about upwelling spots. So if people are interested, I'm gonna hopefully this summer see if we can tack down a couple spots, but no promises yet.
Well, keep us in mind.
Will do.
All right.
And all right.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very
Anytime.
much.
And if you need anyone else to do any top favorite photos, I'm happy to show some of my favorite images one day if you need another speaker.
Okay. Well, I will tomorrow sometime. I'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thanks, Dick. All right. So now I'd like to move to straight video, and if we to Mike. All right, Mike Airy, who I don't know who was listening on when we were first talking, that Mike is shoots video with a Paralenz, of the Vaquita, but he has been for a few years now a product tester for it. So because he won a first prize in the contest and they gave him another camera, and he's parlayed that into quite a career with this. So Mike, if I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, let's see. Desktop, here we go.
And while you're looking there for a second, last year, I believe it was last year, one time, that Mike did a presentation on the Vaquita and what features this video system has. And now there's a new system. So this is what this presentation will be, comparing the two after drinking, I don't know, what is that, 100 different bottles of wine, or is it 400?
So I take it you can see my setup. So as Andrew mentioned, I've been a product tester for Paralenz since 2019. And here you have my current setup. You can see the new Vaquita is the larger camera on the left. The original Paralenz is the smaller version on the right. And I have them mounted side by side and run them in tandem. So what I've done is I've shot a series of videos that I have used to try to highlight the differences between the two cameras. Let me just get rid of this. Okay, so here we see the original Paralenz is on the left and the new Vaquita is on the right. And some immediate observations I've made is the Vaquita clearly has improved the color rendering over the original Paralenz. The sand is a nice neutral color, and you can even see some hints of blue in the rings on the flounder that is completely lost on the original Paralenz on the left. However, one thing I noticed, now you can clearly see that the focal length is different with the new Vaquita. The Paralenz has a much wider view than the new camera, but the Paralenz, to my eye, looks much sharper than the Vaquita. The Vaquita has a softer focus, and that's because the minimal focal length is much greater on the new Vaquita than it was on the original Paralenz. So I've had to learn to keep much more of a distance between myself and my subject in order to avoid that area of soft focus that the new Vaquita has now compared to the original Paralenz. However, when we go to a much wider shot, we can see that the minimum focal length is not an issue here because everything is nice, distant, and you can see that the colors are much better. They're really presenting the scene much more authentically than the original Paralenz. The change of the focal distance, the softness that the Vaquita displayed in the previous view is not an issue here with this one. You can see that the colors are nicer, there's a lot more detail in the shadows. So clearly here, when it comes to strictly wide angle, the Vaquita is seeing some clear improvements. Now we've come to another close-up shot, and in this one, it's very clear to me that the focal length change of the new Vaquita is causing a problem. This image here of the juvenile drum is much too soft. The original Paralenz is clearly sharper, while the colors are not as good. There's clearly too much of a tint to the original Paralenz. The new Vaquita, again, the sand is a nice neutral color. The drum itself has got some nice whites, but that softness of focus to me just really kind of ruins this shot. But now back again to a wide angle, we see that the colors of the new Vaquita are just marvelous. They really make the whole view look much nicer. The soft focus is not an issue here because everything is so far from the camera that it really doesn't cause any problems. And with the original Paralenz, you can barely see the eagle ray in the middle distance there, which stands out much better with the new Vaquita. So here again, the strictly wider angle shots, the Vaquita is much better. But again, here on a close shot, we see that the Paralenz, the sharpness of focus on the Paralenz, again, is very apparent. The Vaquita, the clinging crab, almost looks a little blurry. And the colors are much nicer. There's shadow detail that is completely lost with the original Paralenz. But the soft focus is just so disappointing. So what I've had to do is I still use both cameras in tandem. And what I've done is I've gotten into the habit of making sure that when I get close to my subject, and that minimum focal length is about 3 feet, when anytime I'm getting closer than 3 feet to anything that I want to capture, I make sure that the original Paralenz has the subject focused in the center. Now here we see another close-up shot. This is in a different situation here. This is a night dive, so I'm using video lights. I've got 2 big blue video lights going now, and we can see that the colors with the artificial light are actually not too bad. The original Paralenz renders the colors with the artificial light much better, and it almost appears like the new Vaquita has that green tint. What really stands out to me, though, is that with all the motion of the various fish in the foreground, you can clearly see that soft focus is a problem. The original Paralenz on the left is much sharper for almost the entire image than what we can see with the Vaquita on the right. So as far as the Vaquita is concerned, that the Paralenz is a clear winner for me on this particular shot. Now we come to another wider shot, this beautiful butterfly fish here. Again, there's no question, the Vaquita color is just marvelous. You've got really nice tones. It's much more representative of what I remember seeing on the dive. We see that clear green tint on the original Paralenz, but I still can see that the soft focus in the foreground of the Vaquita is not apparent with the original Paralenz. The original Paralenz has a much better depth of field, and that minimum focal length for the original Paralenz is actually only about 12 inches. So I'm able to get much closer to my subject. Now, finally, I have here a shot of a turtle. And what I did was I reframed the original Paralenz, and I do a wipe from the original Paralenz to the Vaquita. Now we can see that the differences in the color, there's less of a tint on the Vaquita. Where it's a much wider shot, the softer focus of the Vaquita is not a problem here. So in a shot like this, the Vaquita is a clear winner. Now, as an experiment, what I did was I took the same video footage and I reframed the original Paralenz so that it was as close to the Vaquita as I could get. Then I did a little bit of color correction. I didn't spend a lot of time trying to match the Vaquita, but I did do some basic balancing to bring the colors more in line with what the Vaquita is representing. And then to give the Vaquita a little bit of a hand up, I did some sharpening. I added some mid-tone detail and I did some general sharpening. So here we can see what I was referring to as color variation. In spite of the fact that I was able to get the original Paralenz colors to come in line with the Vaquita, we can still see a lot of color variation in the Vaquita that I was not able to bring out in the original Paralenz. Another observation I made is that while the sharpening of the Vaquita really did help the image considerably, zooming in on the Paralenz to reframe it, you can see limitations. Some of the image is a bit pixelated. So while it is still sharper, that pixelation is taking away from the image quality, and we now can see that with the sharpening of the Vaquita, the detail, especially in the background, the surrounding area, is much nicer than the original Paralenz. And here we have, again, the Paralenz on the left. I've done some minimal color correction to try to bring it in line with the Vaquita. And the Vaquita has been sharpened a little bit to try to make it as nice and clear focus as the original Paralenz. And here again, I think that the post-processing has benefited the Vaquita considerably. We can see some nice sharp detail. Most everywhere compares very favorably to the original Paralenz. The zooming in of the original Paralenz is revealing that pixelation again. The shadow detail of the Vaquita is quite better than the original Paralenz. Here we have our spotted drum again. And this time though, in spite of the sharpening, because the subject is moving about so much, that sharpening still isn't quite able to match the clarity of focus of the original Paralenz. If you notice, the spotted drum on the right is still a little softer compared to the spotted drum on the left. But again, the color variation, and just to be clear, what I'm referring to on color variation is if you look into some of the background area, you'll notice some of the yellows on the right. You can see more tones of yellow, more shades of yellow, if you will. If you look into the background, the grays of the sand vary more than what you see on the left. So color variation, I think, is very important because it helps keep the image from being a little boring, so to speak. Now here we're back to a wide angle. And as I observed before, the wide angle shot doesn't really suffer from that soft focus for the Vaquita. So even though I was able to bring the Paralenz nicely into the same color range, we can clearly see that in spite of the Paralenz having a sharper focus, by zooming in to frame it so that it matches the Vaquita, we can clearly see here that the loss of detail in zooming in is very apparent. There's no question that the Vaquita wins on this one, but just that little bit of sharpening really helps make the Vaquita pop. Now here I noticed something that again is a little disappointing with the Vaquita. Now I reframed the Paralenz on the left, as I did with all the previous shots. I did some minor color correction to try to bring it more in line with the color rendered by the Vaquita. And we can see here that the sharpening of the Vaquita has really made a big difference as far as the background and the surrounding area around the clinging crab. But what I noticed is that the Vaquita is suffering a little bit from the highlights being blown out. If you look closely in the wider areas around the crab, you can see that there's some blown out areas that aren't quite as dramatically blown out on the original Paralenz. But again, that little bit of sharpening for the Vaquita really goes a long way towards kicking that image up and giving it a clear win here. In particular, if you notice, if you look into the deeper shadows, you can see a lot more detail on the Vaquita than is apparent with the original Paralenz. But if you look at the center of the clinging crab, I think that the sharpness, the clarity of the detail in the clinging crab on the original Paralenz on the left still beats what we see with the sharpened version of the clinging crab on the right. So while the background looks marvelous, the subject is not quite as superior with the Vaquita. Now here we can see that again, the moving fish, there's no amount of sharpening is going to make them as clearly focused as what we see with the Paralenz on the left. You can clearly see a difference in the stripes of the little guys swimming around. But if you'll notice, if you look at the eyes, you can see shades of blue in the eyes that are not as noticeable on the Paralenz. The Vaquita, again, the Vaquita's color variation is much nicer. Part of that is because I didn't do any color correcting on the Vaquita. And in spite of all the color correcting I did with the Paralenz, and again, I didn't go to any great effort to do this color correcting. I didn't want to spend too much time trying to get the Paralenz to match the Vaquita, but you really can't bring back color that doesn't exist. So here now we see that I was able to actually get this particular image to match almost exactly as far as colors are concerned. But if you look at some of the images and some of the foreground, you can see more variation in the red spot in the middle there. The greens have more variation. The sharpening of the Vaquita on the right has definitely made a big improvement here. The difference in the softness between the two is almost negligible. But again, the Vaquita is suffering from those highlights being blown out. If you look at the bottom right, you can see, even though the Paralenz is also blown out, the loss of detail in the highlights of the Vaquita is quite a bit more than what I'm seeing in the Paralenz. So, but the surrounding detail is marvelous. The Vaquita clearly is able to really render the wider angle aspects of the image much better than the Paralenz. Zooming in on the Paralenz does unfortunately reveal limitations. The pixelation comes forward. So in conclusion, I can't really say there's a clear winner. The new Vaquita has some improvements, but that loss of the minimal focal length, I find very disappointing. Both cameras benefit considerably from post-processing, but while I can improve color, I can't fix a blurry image. So I'm not going to be abandoning my old Paralenz anytime soon. But I do find that I'm using the new Vaquita more and more because it is superior when it comes to strictly the wider angle shots. And that's my conclusion.
No, Mike, I have a question on the,
Yes.
like say with the clinging crab, where
Mhm.
the crab itself with the newer system, it wasn't as sharp on the actual crab. What was your distance again on that? How far away were you?
Well, the minimal focal length of the Vaquita is 3 feet. So I would have to have been a little closer than 3 feet. I don't actually remember exactly where I was as far as the real distance from my subject, but it was within that 3 feet because that's where the softer focus of the Vaquita becomes very apparent.
Now, what will Paralenz, what's their plan to do to?
Well, they're coming out with a macro lens for the Vaquita, a wet lens, a flip lens that you can attach to the body of the camera, and then flip it up and down as needed. So I'm waiting for them to send me the macro lens for testing purposes. I'm hoping that I'll have it in time for my next trip.
So can I ask a couple of questions?
By all means.
Because I'm everything you said is completely some of the findings that I found about the Vaquita. I don't have an old Paralenz, so I wasn't able to do this type of comparison, but I have watched several YouTubers that have done comparisons, including, going against certain GoPros and stuff. The blurry focus, that is definitely for macro. I definitely ran into that. I've for a good 6 months now, I've been working building adapters for the Vaquita to allow macro use. I've actually made designs available on Thingiverse on being able to adapt various filters and stuff that are sold by Backscatter for the Paralenz Vaquita. I do have to say that I've had the success has been very limited because there's a very narrow depth of focus that I run into when I start using adapter lenses. I'm very interested to see what Paralenz themselves comes out with, because it seems to be very similar to the lenses I've tried. I think the only difference is going to just be the distance from the native lens on the Vaquita, that they might be finding a better sweet spot than I was able to do with several dives. I do like the Vaquita a lot. I use it mostly for data logging, and I use it for a wide angle. So these little inconsistencies haven't really bothered me much. But I actually have it right in front of me here. It's a cool little thing. A lot of people do ask me, and I'm sure someone here is going to ask the question is, do you prefer it over a GoPro? With the consideration that you can fix the color and stuff, with the software that GoPro provides. And you're already talking about post-processing of the video from the Vaquita.
I'm sorry, what is your question?
The question is, you're already doing post-processing.
Yes.
So do you still see a huge benefit over the Vaquita over a GoPro?
Well, I'm afraid I can't really speak to that because I've never used a GoPro.
I figured that.
I started using the Paralenz back in 2017, and that has been the only video camera I've used. For macro video, I use the Olympus TG5. So yeah, I think you saw, if you recall, looking at my setup, the the Paralenz is mounted to the cold shoe of the
Yep.
TG5.
Yep, you got them mounted on top.
Yep, so I use them, depending on the nature of the shot, I'll switch from one camera to another. So I have the TG5 for strictly macro. I have the original Paralenz for that middle distance or up to about 3 feet. And then anything wider than that, I rely on the new Vaquita.
Okay. Another quick question. Since you've been using the Vaquita for a while, have you seen a marked improvement with the firmware updates? They've definitely improved battery performance, but have you, since you've done a couple dives in the thing, have you actually noticed any of these issues getting better with their firmware updates?
Oh yeah, they're great with the firmware updates. The last one in particular, as you have observed, the battery life has improved considerably. It had been suffering from some issues with their new depth controlled color correction had been
DCC,
flickering quite a
yes.
bit. Yeah, the DCC. It had been flickering quite a bit, but they've improved its sampling rate, so you don't see that kind of color, that abrupt color change anymore. But I still can't get past that minimal focal length. That just really aggravates me, and I've been hammering at them to go back to the original lens. I don't know if that's going to happen with if they come out with a Paralenz 3.0. So we'll just have to wait and see. While they do appreciate my input, I'm not the only product tester they have, so I'm sure I'm not the only one who's made these kind of observations, but whether or not they go back to their original lens, they told me that the change of lens was necessary in order to see that improvement with the DCC. So apparently the hardware change was necessary to enable the improvement in the software.
Okay, it's interesting.
Yeah.
They mentioned to me that it had to do with the new imager they were using, which is, of course, a 12 megapixel imager that originally is now actually running in 12 megapixels for stills. Originally, when it came out, it didn't have that. That's interesting. I actually, this coming summer, I plan to work with the diopter lenses again to see if I can get any better macro performance off the device, but it's mostly just for fun at this point.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for answering the questions.
Oh, thank you. And if anybody's interested in seeing any more of my work with the Paralenz, you can find me on YouTube. I'm Diver23. If you search for Diver23, you'll find my channel, and you can see all the stuff that I've done, both with the original Paralenz and the new Vaquita.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Michael, just a quick question was it just the screen that I was watching, but it looked like the Vaquita had a greater depth of field. Is that the case? Because it might be, you might have a longer minimum focal distance, but for some reason it looked like you had a greater depth of field on that lens, which is, going to a longer focal length. It's usually the opposite. So I was wondering if you knew much about that, or if that's just an artifact of looking on the screen.
I don't really know much about that. I did observe that the wide angle on the Vaquita, the distance was quite clear. It did capture some great detail. It performs marvelously in the shadows, not quite as well in the highlights. Highlights tend to get blown out, but that clarity of the surrounding area when you're beyond that 3-foot minimum focal length is great. You really pick up a lot of detail, a lot of color variation. I don't know if part of that apparent clarity is due to the color variation or not. But it is definitely, in that particular context, it's clearly an improvement over the original Paralenz.
Regardless, it is a great system. And what was terrific about tonight's presentation is that you were showing us simultaneously both cameras shooting the same thing, and that was real helpful. I'm sure the Paralenz appreciated that too. I'm sure you sent them this similar footage.
Well, I don't know how much they appreciated it because I was rather blunt in my opinion of that minimum focal length change and how much I found it a disappointment. They did tell me that they appreciated my comments, but whether or not they were happy to receive them is another story. I don't know.
Well, once the bruised egos calm down a bit, I'm sure they appreciate the objective information. So
Yeah.
for sure. Well, anyway, Mike, thank you very much. This was
You're welcome.
very informative and very entertaining. So thank you. And now we have Jake Stout, and you all have seen Jake's work. And I thought of Jake this morning when got up, and it was early this morning. It was 23 degrees, and I know that Jake is getting ready to spend how many months in the Red Sea, Jake?
A year.
A year. Yeah. So you almost were a cut tonight. So, but I decided to let you go in the last minute
A spite cut,
here.
an envy cut.
Well, I was in a moment of confession. You know.
Well, I'm glad you cut me.
All right. So what do you have for us today, Jake?
So, as I was fishing around for some of my favorite photos, it took me a while to go through all my different portfolios. And what I found was that a lot of the images that I chose were really experiences that I liked the most. So I'm going to share my screen right now. All right. All right, can you see that?
Yes, and it jumped from the nudibranch to the shark. So
That's fine.
okay.
So a lot of the experiences I've had over the few years that I've been diving have been really amazing. I did some dives as a Boston Sea Rovers intern and a lot of dives here in New England. And a few of my most recent dives are also here in this collection. If I can pinpoint a single image in my entire portfolio that made me realize I wanted to become an underwater photographer, it would be this image of a reef shark in Roatan. This was my very first shark dive, my very first boat dive, and it was my fourth dive with a camera. And I had pictured this one image. Everyone else on the shoot was doing a little bit more classic kind of images, no slow shutter speeds. And I did the entire dive shooting slow shutter speeds because I really wanted to accentuate the movement of these sharks. And as I was photographing, I was getting pretty much garbage images. And then this one beautiful image within all those shots that I converted to black and white, which I thought looked a lot nicer. But when I got back up on the boat and they asked, did you shoot any actual no slow shutter speed images? I said, no, I didn't. They, wow, that wasn't very smart. Like, why? So, well, you don't have anything that's natural. I said, well, what does natural mean? And I didn't really understand what some of the other divers were saying about that. And I gradually came to a realization that natural is what anyone makes in it. So art is very subjective and very different. But I think that art is also objective in that we can have images that are better and worse. And for me, this was a better image than a straight image that's not a slow shutter speed. I thought it captured what the shark is a little bit more and what I felt on the dive. I think it's really important as photographers to always bring our own impressions of wildlife, of scenes, of the dive in general into our art. And so for me, it was, like I said, my first shark dive. It was a little chaotic, but the sharks were very rhythmic and they didn't really care about me. They cared about the food there. And so I thought a slow shutter speed worked perfectly.
What was the shutter speed?
This was 1/10 of a second at ISO 100 and f/22. Another thing that really got me into underwater photography was the lighting. I made this image up in a little lake in New Hampshire that I've done a lot of work in. this is as you can see, very, very shallow. This was light streaming through a bunch of trees on a generally overcast day. And for me, on my very first dives, the certification dives, I was at stage 4 park. The viz was probably like 10 feet, if even that. But I could still look up and see these beautiful light rays coming down from the surface. And for me, diving has always been about the light and how different it is underwater, and to experience something that most people really don't get to. And so whenever I see light like this, I become very obsessed with trying to photograph it. So this particular scene, I probably sat here snorkeling for 20 minutes just photographing this one light ray until a cloud went over and blocked the sun. And this image I made about a year ago. This is a skeleton shrimp climbing a tunicate, but this is beneath Boston Harbor in Charlestown Marina. I do boat cleanings there a lot, and a lot of the times it's very grueling work. It's in the cold, but there's a ton of life that lives under the piers there that everyone that has a boat there pretty much doesn't know about. There was even a triggerfish in the harbor this year, and which was, went looking for it, but I didn't find it. But even people don't realize how much life is in Boston Harbor. And so for me, this little skeleton shrimp climbing up a tunicate was that kind of perfect idea of that. And to me, it looked like a little mountain climber with pitchforks climbing up the side of it. For this particular image, I had my friend who also cleans boat, John Lyons, holding a snoot above it. I'm not terribly great with using a snoot, so I always bring an assistant. John is usually the one who helps me. He's very good at holding a snoot completely still and just angling it however I want. So if you do shoot with a snoot, the people who can do it perfectly without an assistant, that's great. I'm not always one of those people. I've shown this image in a few talks I've given here, but this is honestly one of my favorite images ever. The diver in this scene is actually Ryan King. This is up in Newfoundland. Newfoundland is by far one of my favorite diving locations ever. Fantastic visibility. We had probably 50 to 100 feet depending on the dive. It's very cold. I don't think the water temp went above 34 degrees when I was there, and it was in August. But the wrecks, the marine life, it's unbelievable. This is a lion's mane jellyfish. Lion's manes are one of the largest species of jellyfish. They can grow hundreds of feet long. This particular one was probably about 70 to 80 feet. And I can only make that estimate because its tentacles, even though it doesn't totally look like it from the image, stretched back across about a fifth to a quarter of the wreck. The wreck itself beneath this lion's mane is 400 feet long. This is on the PLM 27, one of the 4 wrecks in Newfoundland. And for me, the lion's mane jellies are just such a very interesting one. There's a lot of photos that have been made of them, a lot of split shots, in fact. In Vancouver, Dave Dublé has some brilliant images of them. He has one from Rhode Island as well in front of the wind farm. And they're very, very unique jellyfish. They're bright and colorful. They have these beautiful oral tentacles with different colors. And the bell of them has this beautiful pinkish, reddish color. For this particular image, to accentuate that color and kind of have the light bounce around to get a little bit more texture, I pulled my right strobe off to the side and angled it in towards the jellyfish coming from this side, while the left strobe is still shooting pretty much straight on. And by doing that, it gets the light inside of the jellyfish a little bit more and heightens that texture rather than shooting straight onto it. This is another image that I'm really very fond of. I spent a few dives just trying to get this one image. And I would go out, this is in Monterey, California. Every day I would go out searching for a nice patch of Metridium anemones to photograph. And of course, I wanted in the background all these beautiful sea nettles, another very, very nice jellyfish to photograph. And I went out day after day getting my bearings, trying to find them. And I wasn't having too much luck. Then I finally found these two beautiful Metridium anemones. All the other ones were closed, and these two were open, feeding on all the plankton. So I photographed them for maybe 20 minutes, and I had planned to surface out in the water, not swim back into shore, because it's a very long swim out to this field. And as I was surfacing through all of the jellyfish, I got stung many, many times, which I kind of wanted to be honest, just to know what it was like. But it's not horrible with the sea nettles. The lion's manes are a different story, though. But once I surfaced, I spun around a little bit, and I looked, and the shore was so far away. It took me about an hour to swim back into shore on the surface. And that's also climbing over all the kelp. There were sea otters swimming around me, laughing at me as I was climbing and struggling over the kelp. But when I got back on shore and I was out here for a backscatter photo competition, I showed this image to one of the backscatter crew, Dylan Silver, and he said to me that this image is really about the sun and how all these jellyfish are feeding on the plankton that the sun has, and then the anemones, their cousins, are also feeding on all the stuff that the sun brings. I had never even thought about that while photographing this. So I always love when I can make an image that someone else sees meaning in that I didn't see. And also, the other side of that is I can take credit for that now. I didn't think of that at all. But while talking to Dylan, I said, yeah, it's all about the sun. So it's always a nice little thing when that happens. But the thing that I really loved about this image was that these little lines here on this Metridium are actually tentacles from some of the sea nettles that got clipped off and stuck to them. And so it has that kind of nice interplay between the two species, both cnidarians, cousins of each other. Out of all the images I have, this is probably one of my favorite experiences, was this particular shoot with snapping turtles. I might have shown some of the snapping turtle work for Undersea Photo Society before, but this particular image, I spent about 3 months trying to get. Snapping turtles have always had, in my opinion, a kind of bad reputation. All the videos that I see of them online, they're always biting someone or hissing on the side of the road. But when they're underwater, they're completely docile. I found a few conflicting sources. One field guide that I had said, yes, they're very calm. Another one said they can be dangerous. So when I first found one, I didn't want to get anywhere near it and was just sitting there doing nothing. These again are up in New Hampshire in that lake. And over time, as I photographed them more and more often and got to see them, this particular one, which I nicknamed Smiley because he always had a smile, whereas some of the other ones were a bit more curmudgeonly, I really got to know them personally, and so I could recognize all the different turtles in the lake. And this particular turtle would sometimes even come up to me. I would be photographing a bass, then I'd look next to me and it would be sitting there. Over time, as I was looking at these turtles and their habitat and understanding them, I also began to look at other images of snapping turtles. I didn't find too many. I found 4 or 5 really nice snapping turtle images. One from Cape Cod, another from West Virginia, and a couple in Florida. And all of them had very similar compositions. They were all on the bottom, looking straight at the turtle. And so I really wanted to get an image of a turtle at the surface. The surface for snapping turtles is their most vulnerable area because they're breathing air going up to the surface. Nothing is really going to hurt them. They're the apex predator of a lake. But at the same time, they're a little bit cautious at the surface. So it took me a few months to gain the trust of this turtle so that I would be able to swim along with it for 30 minutes, an hour, and it would go to the surface every once in a while. I'm shooting with a fisheye lens in this image, and so I'm only maybe a foot away from this snapping turtle. A pretty large snapping turtle, if I had to guess, probably weighs between 40 to 50 pounds. Very big shell, but totally docile. Very nice animal. I love photographing snapping turtles. Probably my favorite subject. Another one of my favorite images is this one. I made this a couple of years ago in Fort Wetherill. And I had originally planned to photograph spider crabs and try some slow shutter speed work with them. The only dive I've ever done at Fort Wetherell that I did not see a spider crab on. So I searched around for other subjects. On this dive, it was particularly bad viz. It was only about a foot or two. But even in that bad viz, you can make great images. And this to me is one of those. I didn't see just a starfish sitting on the ground in this. To me, what it was a star in a galaxy with nebulas of silt and seaweed floating around it. And so to kind of accentuate that, I pulled out the strobes to the side a little bit more so as not to really get all the particulate in high definition and get them just kind of hazy, that kind of far away look. And I also slowed the shutter speed down to about 1/5 of a second so that you get really, really green water. This is right in front of the point at Fort Wetherell in between the two coves in probably about 20 feet of water. So it's a pretty easy area to shoot, but very silty. In this case, the silt worked to my advantage. The silt on the sides of the image, I thought made for a really nice kind of natural frame around the starfish with the bright orange madrepore as the little highlight there. And for me, this was an image that changed my mind around backscatter. Not the company, but the actual particulate matter. As underwater photographers, we're constantly cursing backscatter and trying to remove it from images and trying to get rid of it through different strobe positionings. And I eventually have come to the realization that it's all right to have backscatter in an image. And most of the time, I don't even remove it anymore. I'll just leave it in. Because at the end of the day, that is part of the environment. Fort Wetherell is a very silty place, typically bad viz. On this day, it was particularly bad. That said, you can work around it because it is part of the environment. Now, this image is one of my favorite reflection images, and it kickstarted a series for me of images of reflections. This is just a birch tree hanging in the water after a big rainstorm. This is obviously a macro image. And here's the water line, and then the really interesting movement and flow of the surface and the reflection that it creates. A very warped, mirrored world. And to me, abstracts, you can find anything, and I love photographing abstracts because no matter who I show this image to, they'll see a different thing within the image. Some people say they see little mountains and landscapes. I had someone else say this, they saw like an insect in here. I still don't see that, but they did. There's other people that will see absolutely nothing, and it will just be a weird abstract image to them, and that's totally fine. But to me, abstractions underwater are really, really fun to play around with. Whether you're shooting a super detail of something, a reflection at the surface, or you're using some weird technique like a slow shutter speed to make something abstract. And for me, this particular image was one of my favorite abstractions. I made this image over the summer. I was very fortunate to be able to go to the Galapagos. I was acting as a trip photographer on one of the kids' sea camp trips there. And I have to say, out of all the diving I've done, the Galapagos is probably one of my favorite places. There's a lot of really amazing marine life there, a lot of endemic stuff. Of course, there's a lot of turtles. We saw a turtle on every single dive, at least one. And for me, this isn't a particularly amazing image or anything, but I love this image because it's just the little bit of simplicity, the silhouette of the turtle and the fish. And it also has what I think is a pleasing composition. Tom Gately mentioned the rule of odds in his talk last month. Well, all the fish in this image, the little surgeon fish, the pompanos, and these little fish, 3 different groups of them, all separated in their little schools, not together, which I thought was kind of cool. And then the haziness of the waves crashing against the rocks. This is on Wolf Island in the north of the Galapagos. And then the weird topography just stretching off into the mist of the haze of the underwater world. I think a lot of times the most beautiful images are sometimes the most simplest. And this for me was one of those cases. Also from the Galapagos, this beautiful green sea turtle, very old one. This was on a marine iguana dive we were doing. I'm going to show an image from that in a second. But for me, this was one of my favorite dives I've ever done. I asked one of the other photographers on the trip if he could photograph me on this dive, because I have very few photos of myself underwater. And all of them are from New England, and with the hood on, I think I look really horrible underwater. So I didn't have a hood on here, and I was hoping for an image. I was going so crazy on the dive, flying around, photographing everything, that there was no time to take an image of me. I pride myself on having a pretty good breathing rate. And on all the deep dives in the Galapagos, I came up with at least half a tank of air. This was the shallowest dive. I don't think I went past 25 feet, and I burnt through the tank. I was going crazy photographing stuff. And so to encapsulate how much marine life I saw on this dive, there was constant sea lions, sea turtles playing marine iguanas, flightless cormorants, and also Galapagos penguins. So to try and get an image to encapsulate how much action was going on within one scene, I thought this did that pretty well. We have a turtle swimming through with some seaweed in his mouth, sea lions playing in the background, and then way, way off in the background, a little marine iguana swimming at the surface. What really attracted me to this scene in the first place, other than all the animals, was the golden seaweed and kelp stretching across the rocks. It was always in the shallows. I was constantly going in to take a look at the light falling across the blades of kelp and seaweed, casting that beautiful golden light across everything. And then if I happened to get a sea turtle and some sea lions swimming through, it was an added bonus. Now this image is also from that dive. Like I said before, I think backscatter is totally fine. This image has a lot of backscatter. It's a very shallow environment with heavy, heavy surf. So there's obviously a lot of particulate matter. That's how the environment is. And I think that's totally fine in this image. Marine iguanas are probably one of my favorite photo subjects other than the snapping turtles. And out of all the images that I had envisioned when I was flying down to the Galapagos, this was my number one image that I wanted to make. And on this dive, I saw probably 20, 30 marine iguanas, but I only photographed 4 of them. Ones that were in nice positions on rocks, or ones that were very calm. They only go in the water once a day to feed on all these green algae and stuff on the rocks. And so if you frighten them, they can go up to the surface and they won't want to come back to eat. So you got to be really careful with them and approach very slowly. So on this particular dive with the iguanas, I saw this one right at the beginning of the dive. All the other divers were around me. My dive buddy was off in the distance on the side here a little bit. And I saw him looking up a little bit, the marine iguana. And so I very slowly approached him to get in very close. Look, he kept looking up, looking down at the rock. And then I saw my dive buddy swimming into the frame. He was going to swim right back in. Oh my gosh. So I backed off and I waved to my dive buddy, a very nice guy named Max. And he thankfully moved off this side. I went back in. This is shot with a 16 millimeter lens. It's a rectilinear lens, so not fisheye. I'm probably only about a foot away from this marine iguana. So very, very close. I have the strobes pulled in pretty close as well to really light everything on the rock, all the little bits of algae, and fill in some of the shadows. And to me, after I got this dive, the dive was perfect, but the rest of the dive, there was so much more marine life as well. Now this last image here is one that I made just a couple weeks ago on a dive with Andrea at Folly Cove. Like I said before, I usually bring an assistant down when I photograph with a snoot. I've been trying to get better at using a snoot, so I've been just having it on the camera without an assistant. And this was one of the results from one of those dives after a bunch of times practicing with it. This beautiful Acanthodorus pilosa just on believe this is hookweed. I'm not exactly sure though. I'm a huge fan of nudibranchs. I have so many images of them. And for me, this is one of my favorite images. I just love the kind of box that the seaweed creates with the Acanthodorus climbing up the side of it. I was very pleased with this composition. And I remember after Andrew and I got out of the water, I was talking about how many Acanthodorus pilosa there was. There was so many of them in the shallows, especially on the right side of the cove. It's a very nice dive. So those are my favorite images. I'll stop sharing. If anyone has any questions.
Fabulous work. Fabulous work. So glad I decided not to cut you for today. Yeah, you have every time when you're showing images here, Jake, you have fabulous stuff. So this is wonderful. Can't wait to see what you come back with from the Red Sea.
Yeah, certainly.
Does anyone have any questions for Jake? No? Okay. Well, again, thank you very much, Jake. Thank you. Well, that just about wraps things up. But once again, I have a little plea for speakers. So if you have anything that you would like, well, two things actually. Anything that you would like to present, it doesn't have to be a whole half hour. If there's something that you, whether it's content from a trip or just a project, would love to see it and share. But also on the reverse, if there's something that you would like us to present, please just send Whitney or me a little quick note and say, how about something on this? Because, we've been doing a lot of presentations over the 14 years, I think. And part of me says, well, we've already done this before. But it may have been 10 years ago. So there's always room for another presentation on something that we have done in the past, especially when there's a lot of new people. Like we had 28 people at the meeting tonight, but in the past we've had the last meeting I think was 30 something. So I know there are new people. So please don't hesitate to request a presentation on something or an explanation on something, because we'll all benefit from it. So with that, thank you all. Make sure your shovel is ready for tomorrow. If you're real energetic, come on over here and you can shovel around my house, and that would be great. Otherwise, enjoy the snow, and thanks for tuning in. Good night, all.
Andy,
Thank
before
you
you
so much, Andy.
Yep.
before you shut it, do you have a list of kind of what the past presentations or topics have been for over the years? Because I mean, that might generate some ideas too, and also see some of what's been covered even more recently than that.
Okay.
Not to make more work
Yes
for
and
you.
no. Yeah, no. I have some, but I haven't gone back. I have some. I'll make a list of what we have done.
Okay.
So yeah, but otherwise, just but just if there's a request for something, that would be terrific.
Andy, I know Whitney's recording this. Do we have a library? Is there a library of presentations that have been recorded?
We don't have one yet. We just started recording in January, but once this one I can put up and I can find a way to kind of have a list for everybody. But I will send this recording out via email, and then on the New England underwater photography page as well. It'll be posted.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Whitney, if it's helpful, is I switched providers, but I'm using a something called podia.com, which is essentially it's an all-in-one platform for learning management.
Okay.
And what it does is it allows everything from like free digital downloads to, you can set up courses for, either payment or for just viewing or whatever else. So if you want to piggyback off of that, I can always post the videos and just make them accessible to people that want to, go on and download them or view them or whatever.
Oh, perfect.
That
Well,
would
thank
be
you so much.
terrific.
I'll reach out to you.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, because one of the things I was planning on doing on one of the future sessions, it was, you know, the disaster recovery one that I was talking about, is I have that, the PDF of it. And a site like that actually helps because you can have the content, the video of it, but you can also have the associated transcripts and those kind of things. So I'll reach out to you if you want to, or just, you know, let me ping me.
Oh, that's terrific.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. Well, again, thanks, everyone, and see you in a month.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.